All right, welcome back to Wisdom Teachings. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I'm very excited to bring you another update into Dmitriev's groundbreaking interplanetary climate change paper. The focus on this episode, primarily, is going to be the transformation of Earth's atmosphere. Now, this is one of those things that when you actually learn what he's telling us, it goes way beyond anything that we could be doing with global warming caused by anthropogenic sources, meaning these fossil fuel emissions and that kind of stuff. Earth's atmosphere is doing some very strange things that totally fits in with the interplanetary climate change model, and this includes weird appearances of ozone and ozone-like compounds, including hydroperoxyl and hydroxide. Very strange stuff going on. Interstellar material that's appearing in our atmosphere that should normally only appear in between stars, and it's now showing up in the charged plasma around the Earth. Now, before we get into Dmitriev's latest thing, another atmosphere that was changed was, of course, the atmosphere around Jupiter. And I'm talking now about the electrical atmosphere, which is the ionosphere. That's the technical name for it. And we were talking specifically about Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 hitting Jupiter back in 1994. So to get started, we're going to go back to that because I tossed something out there last time, and you may have been laughing a little bit, but not after you see this. This is going to be quite something. So as we said in the previous episode, Shoemaker-Levy 9 hit Jupiter on July 17th, 1994. And this was quite a stunning event. It was an event where, as you can see here, this train of 9 fragments, more or less, there's a little more than that, they were all given alphabetical names, and they go and they collide with the planet, as we were saying last time. It was a stunning, grandiose event. For people who were space geeks, they were very excited about this. NASA was making these animations where you see the fragments going in. They really didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but as I told you last time, there were people on the inside who were hoping that it was actually going to ignite the hydrogen and blow up the planet and turn it into a new sun, just like we see in the grand finale of the movie 2010. So the ultraviolet light spectrum, as I said, there were these huge scars, and infrared is really impressive, where you have much more heat than ever would have been expected in any conventional scientific model, showing again Jupiter is being remarkably charged up with some kind of mysterious energy. I also showed you this film of those changes going on in real time. Actually, it's not quite real time, but it's an accelerated timeline, but you see these enormous glows taking place. Now, what was the big trick that I was trying to say last time? The big trick was this idea that Richard C. Hoagland, with his insider contacts at the time, people who I now, at least one person I'm now in contact with, were telling him that a secret space program steered this comet into Jupiter on purpose. And of course, part of that would be that they were hoping Jupiter would ignite and turn into a new star. Now, of course, part of that could be also that they thought the effect might be somewhat catastrophic, if not majorly catastrophic, and therefore help their goals of reducing population. But even if that didn't happen, what a big payoff it would be if the grand finale of the movie 2010 actually happened. If Jupiter suddenly turns into a new star. And they knew there was so much energy in our solar system, they were hoping this could happen. Well, if you're going to go to the trouble of using tractor beams, ancient aliens now, that they could have done this on purpose for a particular day, maybe not even just a particular day of the year, but a particular anniversary of something. Well, let's think about, as Richard Hoagland did, let's think about when this event took place. And now let's go to the slide. It took place almost exactly to the day on the 25-year anniversary of the Apollo moon mission. Here's a photograph from a regular Google search of what happened with Apollo. Take a look. Apollo 11 was the space flight that landed the first 2 humans on the moon. Mission Commander Neil Armstrong and pilot Buzz Aldrin, both Americans, landed the Lunar Surface Module Eagle on July 20th, 1969. Now look at the launch date, July 16th. So they launch on the 16th and they're there on the 20th. This is almost to the day of when the comet hits Jupiter. And the aftermath of the impact is visible on July 17th. So it literally, the day they launch is the day that the comet hits. And this is about as close as anybody with technology like the secret space program would have could possibly have calibrated it. Remember, the photograph is the 17th after the hits have taken place. They get it down to the day. It's hard to even believe that this could be a coincidence. Jay Widener was talking to me in between about Richard C. Hoagland holding him by the lapels and do you realize what this means? Well, yeah, but none of us imagined a secret space program back then. The idea that they would actually have a ship that could steer a comet like that, it was hard to believe, and yet now it's like, yeah, of course the space program could have done something like this. Of course the space program could have done something like this. And the mystery gets even deeper. So let's check out the next thing. Just 3 days after the comet impacts are visible, on July 20th, right on the day that Neil Armstrong has his anniversary of doing his lunar walk, right on the same day, 25-year anniversary, this huge event has just happened with Jupiter, and Neil Armstrong, who hardly ever comes out in public at all, and this is apparently because he knew that he had to tell lies, and he was very distraught about it. He had huge PTSD. He figured, well, maybe just once before I die, I need to go out there and say something. So he speaks at the White House on the 25-year anniversary of Apollo 11, one of the only times he ever made a public address. Right in the middle of the Shoemaker-Levy 9 thing where they were hoping to turn it into a star, steered on purpose by the space program. Do you think Armstrong might want to let something slip? Do you think maybe if he's pissed off about having to lie and that he saw these gigantic ships, if you believe what we heard from William Tompkins, not only did Tompkins say that there were huge ships lining the crater when Armstrong landed, he actually said there were terrifying reptilian Draco standing there as Armstrong came out with their middle fingers up, 3 of them, in front of their ships. It's a crazy story. It's one that Linda Moulton Howe got out of William Tompkins. We didn't have it in one of our episodes, but he keeps remembering things as he goes on here, or it's just a question of asking him the right questions. So anyway, Neil Armstrong would have been very distraught by that. And what the heck is he saying here to let the truth out? Let's take a look.
With us, a group of students.
Let's take a look.
With us, a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief. Those challenges are yours. In many fields, not the least of which is space, because there lies human destiny.
Riveted on the first man on the moon, talking to them, and he looked at them and he said, there are wonders beyond belief. There are truths to be revealed if one can remove truth's protective layers. Now, where in the world does one get the idea the truth has to have protection to be found out?
So that exact quote from the video, as you can see right here, is there are breakthroughs available to those who can remove truth's protective layers. That's pretty stunning because he knows that there's something more. He probably by this point knew about the secret space program. He may have very well been vetted out that they were deliberately doing this Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 trick to try to make the prophecy of the movie 2010 come true, to try to jumpstart this New World Order, to have this big thing that they hope would help them to usher in the New World Order. Maybe they were getting ready, possibly, to disclose art, as we've talked about regarding the transformation of planetary atmospheres was these rings that appeared coming out of Jupiter, going to Io, as we said, this huge magnetic field line. This is the longer term one that showed up. And at first, there were two, which you can see right here, 45 minutes after impact on the 25-year anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11 that went to the moon. This is what happens 45 minutes later. And as I said, you got this enormous X-ray flash, a tremendous burst of energy, much bigger than they expected, because the planets are charging up and they're having much more energy running through them than we expected. And that, of course, is what we've been calling interplanetary climate change. Another important point to mention here is that if you actually read the book 2010 and you go all the way to the end, Arthur C. Clarke says that Richard C. Hoagland gave him the idea for the book. So apparently, Hoagland, with his insiders, was able to pass some kind of information to Arthur C. Clarke. That's one theory. Hoagland may have a different idea. But one theory is that Hoagland may have gotten some information, and he was the guy who leaked it to Arthur C. Clarke to help pave the way for this stunning event on the exact 25-year anniversary of Apollo. Now we're going to get back into interplanetary climate change. I'm going to take you through a couple examples of what Dr. Oleksii Dmitriev had to say about other planets, and then we're going to get into the transformation of Earth's atmosphere. So let's get going. Dr. Oleksii Dmitriev talked about changes on Mars. He had a couple great pieces of data that I was able to later verify. A series of Martian atmosphere transformations that are increasing the quality of its biosphere, meaning on Mars. He had a couple great pieces of data that I was able to later verify. A series of Martian atmosphere transformations that are increasing the quality of its biosphere, meaning the ability for life to exist. In particular, he describes there is a cloudy growth in the equator area and an unusual growth of ozone concentration. Now, in this little animation from NASA of Mars, you can see that there are clouds in its atmosphere along the equator. Those were not there before. This is very important. Mars used to be cloudless, and this is something new that has happened as a direct result of these interplanetary climate changes that we've been talking about. The clouds simply did not exist before, but they're there now. Interestingly, Dmitriev also said that the atmosphere had gotten so much thicker that a probe sent by NASA was damaged on the way in, and I was able to verify this did happen. Check it out. This greater atmospheric density bent one of the solar array arms on this probe going in beyond its full and open stop. This combination of events delayed the beginning of the scheduled photo mission to Mars for 1 year. And remember, he wrote this back in '97. And then we get to the infamous atmosphere of natrium on the moon. And this becomes a funny thing because I didn't know what natrium was. Andrew Tetanov was the guy who translated this from Russian into English, and I believe that there was some misunderstanding where the Russian word for sodium was natrium, because sodium on the periodic table is Na. That's what it looks like. So like if you see sodium chloride, it's NaCl. That's salt, right? Na, you could actually say the original word is natrium, and that's what the Russians use, so it never got turned into sodium in the translation. And this becomes a funny point later on, because I wrote an article about this. Actually, I was interviewed for an article about this, and it went totals of copies on the internet, literally. Is you Google up Dmitriev natrium. And nobody knew what the heck the natrium atmosphere was. I didn't know either because I hadn't done the research yet. So this is how it reads in the original paper. Take a look. A first stage atmosphere is now being generated on the moon. It wasn't there before, where a growing natrium atmosphere is detected that reaches 9,000 kilometers in height. And then, again, it took me years to figure out that natrium was sodium. The internet really sucked back in these days of '98, and therefore you couldn't find what you wanted. It was not easy. So here's a nice little NASA animation of the moon, the parts that we're allowed to see and the parts that we're not allowed to see. And this sodium atmosphere actually reached a height of 9,000 kilometers, and it wasn't there before. That's another one of the ones that if you really look, you can find some NASA stuff about it, but they were very circumspect. This was more of a Russian scientific discovery. Again, this extra energy coming into our solar system, charging up the atmosphere of the moon, creating this visible sodium that wasn't there before. Now we're going to pop ahead to Venus. And Dmitriev had some interesting things to say on Venus as well. And in my own later research, I was able to go well beyond these few little points that he found. Take a look. Significant physical, chemical, and optical changes are being observed on Venus. An inversion of the dark and light spots has been detected for the first time, and a sharp decrease in the amount of sulfur gas in its atmosphere. I was able to prove that. All right, now we're going to get into the transformation of Earth's atmosphere. This is what I've been intending to focus on in this episode because it's so bizarre. So we have some context of some of the other planets and their atmospheres changing. We looked at Mars with the cloudy growth. We looked at Venus with a major decrease in sulfur gas. And we looked at Jupiter where these huge plasma arcs at 1,000,000 amps per tube come blasting out of it and go all the way over to Io. So let's see what happens to Earth's atmosphere in light of this interplanetary climate change. Take a look. This is what Dmitriev wrote in his paper. A change in the quality of interplanetary space causing an increase in its interplanetary and solar planetary energy transmitting properties, meaning that energy in our solar system is actually conducting better and faster. I've often at my conferences likened this to the idea of a pan on a stove. If you haven't heated the pan and you put a drop of water in there, what's going to happen? The water's just going to sit in one place. But the hotter the pan gets, the more when you put that water in, it's going to start sizzling around, and the hotter it is, the faster it's going to travel. So now imagine that as our solar system is charging up, actual particles will travel through space faster, particles from the sun. And Dmitriev talked about this, and in years after his paper came out, he has been proven more and more correct. Everything is actually traveling faster, and it's totally accelerating all these processes in Earth's atmosphere. Let's take a look. He talks about new energy appearing in the Van Allen radiation belts. A report already exists of 2 new populations of cosmic particles that were not expected to be found in the Van Allen radiation belts, and we're going to prove that later on. Particularly, an injection of a greater than 50 million electron volt dense electron sheaf into the inner magnetosphere during the times of abrupt magnetic storms. So what that's saying is that Earth's magnetic field is now getting this huge blast of magnetic energy that it wouldn't normally have during these solar storms, and it actually fundamentally changes the Van Allen belts. In fact, there's a NASA diagram where they call it new belt because it had never been there before and it just showed up as a result of solar activity. Let's keep reading. And just as I said, the emergence of a new belt consisting of ionic elements traditionally found in the composition of stars. So that's the first part of the transformation of Earth's atmosphere. And then he gets into this very interesting little discussion next, where he talks about how our position in the interstellar space, as we move into this cloud, is programming the energy of the sun. Take a look. This newly changed quality of interplanetary space not only performs the function of a planetary interaction transmission mechanism, that's a big mouthful, but it most importantly exerts stimulating and programming action upon the solar activity, both in its maximal and minimal phases. So what he's saying there is that solar activity is being stimulated and programmed by this excited energy that we're moving into that has caused, as I said in the last episode, the front end of our heliosphere, where it's burning and hot, it's gotten 1,000 times longer. There's that much more stuff, energy, heat happening at the front. Now let's continue. The seismic effectiveness of the solar wind is also being observed. That means, once again, there's corresponding changes in seismic activity on Earth, earthquakes. Nobody's regular science model accounts for this. Wallace Thornhill's probably does in the electric universe model, but conventional science, no freaking way. You're not supposed to have that much of a connection, but once you start to see that there could be a plasma core inside the Earth, then there are going to be electrical interactions between the Earth and the Sun that could account for these types of phenomena. Now let's go on. As far as the Sun is concerned, we must first note the fact that significant modifications have occurred in the existing behavioral model of the central object of our solar system. This conclusion comes from observations and reportings of unusual forms, energetic power, and activity in the Sun's function. We'll get into those later. As well as modifications in the Sun's basic fundamental properties. Again, we'll cover all this later. Now let's go on. Moreover, the Ulysses spacecraft traversing the high heliospheric latitudes recorded the absence of the Sun's normal magnetic dipole with north and south, which drastically changed the general model of helio-solar magnetism and further complicated the magnetologists' analytic presentations. So that's a very bizarre thing, that the Sun normally would have magnetic north and magnetic south, and as a result of moving into this cloud, the whole magnetic field temporarily just disappeared or changed into something they didn't expect. That is a magnificent change. That is something nobody has any explanation for that. The existing models expect that the magnetic field just hangs out and it just stays there and no big deal. It's stable. You don't have to worry about it. Where did it go? That's how big this new energy that we're moving into that it has. It has such a big effect that the Sun's magnetic field just dissipated. Now let's keep reading. As a whole, all of the reporting and observation facilities give evidence to a growth in the velocity, quality, quantity, and energetic power of our solar system's heliospheric processes. And then he makes an update on January 8th, 1998. The unexpected high level of solar activity in the later half of 1997, continuing into the present time, strongly substantiates the above statement. There were 3 X-level 9 flux events in 1997, and only one was forecasted. That's a 300% increase. So an X9 solar flare is a really big deal, and there's been very few of them in the entire observational history of the Sun. It's a lot of energy to come out all at once. And instead of there just being one of these, there was 3. So this again shows a very sizable change, and NASA keeps the whole thing buried. They don't want to tell you about this stuff. They don't want to create panic, but at the same time, if you're a spiritual person, shouldn't you be able to know? Shouldn't you be able to prepare yourself if you believe that this is some kind of spiritual event? I think you should. And that's why I'm glad you're watching my show. Let's keep going. The most dramatic of this was an X9.1 CME on November 6, 1997. It created a proton event in Earth's atmosphere that lasted for 72 hours. The character, scale, and magnitude of the current solar activity has increased so much that one official government Sun satellite reporting station recently began their daily report by saying, "Everything pretty much blew apart on the Sun today, January 3rd, 1998. Part on the Sun today, January 3rd, 1998. So these protons also hit the Earth a lot faster than they were supposed to have, and NASA doesn't know what the heck is going on. There's solar flares. They had to change the models quietly because they only expected 1 X9 flare and they get 3. Now let's keep reading. There were reports of a global temperature maximum, this is now we're getting into the Earth again, in 1994, and the almost uninterrupted existence of an El Nino-like hydrological effect. This is during the same year the Shoemaker-Levy 9 hit Jupiter. Satellite air surface layer temperature tracking in our atmosphere allowed for the detection of a 0.22 degrees Celsius global temperature variation within a typical specific time of about 30 days that correlated with recorded oscillations in the magnetic field. Holy crap. I hope you can understand and pour through the geek speak, because this is dense, okay? What is he actually saying? It's simple. You just got to read it carefully. He's saying that magnetic fluctuations in the magnetic field directly corresponded to temperature fluctuations. That's not supposed to happen. The magnetic field is the magnetic field, and temperature is supposed to be a function of solar heating. But now we're seeing them rise and fall in lockstep. That again gets into this integrated model, this hyperdimensional model, that everything is a lot more connected than we've been led to believe, and I do feel this is another aspect of suppressed science that NASA has been hiding from us, and guys like the electric universe model from Wallace Thornhill, they are covering a lot of this type of data, but it also showed up in Dmitriev's paper. Now let's read a little more. The Earth's temperature, Wallace Thornhill, they are covering a lot of this type of data, but it also showed up in Dmitriev's paper. Now let's read a little more. The Earth's temperature regime is becoming more and more dependent on external influences. There is a growing probability that we are moving into a rapid temperature instability period similar to the one that last happened 10,000 years ago. This not-so-ancient major instability was revealed by ice core samples in Greenland. The analysis of these core samples established that annual temperatures during this short burst of time, 10,000 years ago, the temperature increased by 7 degrees Celsius very quickly. That's huge. Precipitation grew 300 to 400%. So there's a heck of a lot more rain, there's a huge increase in temperature, and there was a 100 times increase in dust. A lot of stuff happened here all at once. This is a stunning, dramatic, monumental event, and the 100 times increase of dust, what do you think that is? That's volcanoes. That's a huge amount of volcanic eruptions. The heat from the volcanoes creates this massive increase in temperature, and it creates this precipitation because there's more rain and more clouds from all of this dust in the air. When we come back next time, we're going to finish out the stunning work of Dmitriev on interplanetary climate change, and we're going to take it forward into my own replication and extension of his research with provable NASA data. That's coming up next time here on Wisdom Teachings. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I thank you for watching.